Hey everyone, welcome to First Tuesdays with Heart. It is Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. First Tuesdays is sponsored by the Heart Pure Support Team in connection with the Resiliency and Justice Center in Las Vegas. Heart stands for Healing, Empowering, and Rebuilding Together. We're a peer support program for anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. Real quick, want to give you an introduction to the Heart team. Alice is a licensed professional counselor and certified personal life coach. She's the co-director of our Heart Peer Support Program, and she also facilitates the Route 91 and UNLV support group. Jackie is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is the behavioral health program coordinator for the Resiliency and Justice Center. She was one of our original heart coaches, as was our presenter tonight. And Jackie facilitates the Route 91 as well as continue the conversation with heart support groups. And I'm Jill Winter. I'm the co-director of Heart. I'm a Route 91 survivor. I assist Alice with the UNLV support group and Jackie with the continuing the conversation with heart support groups. So we always like to start with a quote or a meme that kind of goes to what our topic is tonight. And we thought this was perfect. Not all scars show, not all wounds heal. Sometimes you can't always see the pain someone feels. And that's so good to remember because PTSD, not all wounds are visible. So tonight we are thrilled to welcome back Dr. Amy O'Neill Gregorian. As I mentioned, Amy was one of our first heart coaches, so we've had the pleasure of been working for her for almost 5 years now. Amy is a clinician, consultant, and educator with over 30 years of experience in mental health, deeply engaged with the complexities of human experience, how we navigate pain, find resilience, and recovering from life's event challenges. She's provided support and consultation at the local, national, and international levels. And she was just sharing with us she might have a chance to go to Vienna and work with the UN. So that's huge. As a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombings, she combines lived experience, which deepens her knowledge and professional expertise in ways that resonate deeply with victims and survivors of terrorism and mass violence. Dr. O'Neill has developed learning communities and webinars, provided trauma-informed care and consultation following incidents of mass violence, and presented at national and international conferences. She's a consultant for the National Mass Violence Center, the Office of Victims of Crime VOCA Center, and the Office of Victims of Crime TTAC, Mass Violence Response and Training. She's responded to several mass violence incidents and supports individuals and community recovery. She also had a hand. I know most of you have heard us mention the Transcend app, and we definitely encourage you to do that. And Amy had a role in developing the Transcend app too. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. So with that, Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So thank you for having me. It's always such an honor and privilege to be a part of the Heart 91 or Heart program, Heart Route 91 Heart. They're all conflating in my mind, but I just really appreciate all that Jill and Alice and the whole team does over there because, as you know, it's really hard, and this is a lifelong journey, the healing part. So, the topic today, talking about PTSD and stress, and sort of what do we do with doubters, and in thinking about that, the prompt for tonight's conversation, I thought we could call this "Healing on My Time." I think when all of us think about our incidents and what we've been through, we're going to start with what most survivors or people impacted say, which is life before and everything else that's happened since that moment in time that changed your life forever. For me, life before my incident was really about a certain kind of freedom and innocence that goes away. It changes the way that you see the world, as we were chatting about before we started tonight. And I think that's important to remember because I think that's, at least for me, where the healing journey really began, was realizing that there's really no going back to life before. And it seems so intuitive now thinking about it and talking about it, but I remember at the time it took a long time to figure that out. okay, there is no going back. It's just this kind of simple thing, but nobody ever tells you, at least nobody told me. So life before that certain innocence, the freedom, the way that we saw things prior to our attack. And then we get impacted, at least for me, impacted by an MBI can leave a wound that's hard to describe, a sense of searching for something, not really knowing what. And challenges, I see a typo, challenge and can challenge the way you feel about yourself in the world. So that's something that I wrote early on. And that for me was the start of how do I name what's happening? And I think when we talk about traumatic stress and PTSD, that's part of what we're trying to do is put words to our experiences to find a way to describe something that we don't know what we're trying to describe. And I think that's also where the conflict with friends and family and loved ones starts. I think they don't know what to tell us either. They just want us to be the way that they're used to us being. We're not comfortable going back to that. We don't know who we are yet. And it starts those little ruptures in relationships. At least it did for me. Um, and I think it is hard to describe. I do think it's a wound, like Jill was saying, they can be invisible. The psychological wounds aren't something that you see. And, we are searching for something. And sometimes we don't know what. And that's part of the frustration I think people feel with us. It's part of the frustration we feel with them. We're not sure what to call it. We know we need something. We don't know what. We don't know what to ask for, but people are telling us the wrong things and it just can become really challenging. The morning after my incident was probably the most loneliest morning of my life. Sent my kids off to school. I sent my husband to work, and I just sat there with my cup of coffee looking out my kitchen window, trying to figure out if I trusted what my mind was telling me that happened. The day before, I was disbelieving, almost not trusting my own mind to a point where I went out into the garage and checked my bag that had my shoes in it and still had blood on them. So I was like, okay, that happened. So, and then just trying to figure that out. I know that I felt betrayed. Oops. Sorry, I was trying to move the pictures of us so I can see the rest of my notes that I want to cover. Um, I know that I felt betrayed by my family and friends. I think just because I wanted them to know something that they didn't know. I wanted them to say something that they couldn't figure out how to say. And then, people say the wrong things like you're lucky and all that other stuff. And that's really hard because it causes anger, it causes frustration. What I was sure of is that I wanted to be alone. And I felt like the pain was very, very private. I don't know if it was private because I didn't know what to call it, or if it was private because I didn't trust to share it when I didn't feel like they were getting it either. I was at a conference, I don't know, a couple years after, and somebody said, if you could just had to pick one word to describe your experience, what would it be? And I said, that's easy, lonely and, and or alone, kind of the same word. Again, just that it's really difficult to identify and express, to even name or figure out the emotions, and just finding the words to describe the way that you feel. And it's strange because we do feel shame. And I haven't been able to find any good resources that explain why, but shame and trauma and victimization, they are, they show up together all the time, in all kinds of victimization. And I've actually found some resources that said, yes, we know this happens and we're not sure why, but it happens. So, and shame somehow is that somehow I'm bad or something's wrong with me because I feel this way. The feeling of helplessness was really important for me to identify as well. Um, Sometimes that survivor guilt shows up because we feel helpless. And sometimes shame shows up because we feel helpless. And it's a way of kind of turning on ourselves because I can be mad at myself for not being better, for not knowing more, for not doing something different. That feels less powerless than being confronted by the situation that we were put in or that we found ourselves in, being victimized, being terrified. That kind of helplessness is much more stressful to look at and to really see as something real that happened to us. So sometimes we can do something about being mad at ourselves. There's not much you can do when you're helpless. I think it's very confusing. And but why so lonely if we have people in our lives? And that for me was one of the real challenges to try to understand. And for me, that was one of those things that contributed into that invisible wound that Jill was talking about. It creates an incredible amount of tension. And that, for me, sort of describes the conflict between it's tension between life and death. It's tension between I'm okay and I'm not okay. I want to be okay and I'm not okay. Or you want me to be okay and I'm not okay. It's tension between our needs and the needs of our families and our friends. There's tension between our needs and the needs of the world. So, one of the ways that shows up is, we hear all these stories about people that did amazing, incredible things, the heroes, the ones that ran towards trouble. The world needs that in the face of mass violence attacks. The world needs to know that there's people doing incredible things. I think sometimes for those of us impacted, that creates more stress and or distress. I wasn't one of those amazing people that did wonderful things. I'm just over here trying to figure out how to get through till tomorrow. I don't feel Boston strong, or I don't feel, Vegas strong, whatever the slogan is. And then tension between being strong and resilient and being wounded and sad, or being traumatized, or being um, weighed down with traumatic stress. So I think tension for me describes a lot in the process. And I think that there's, sometimes an imposterish feeling about victimization. I think that the hierarchy that shows up in most communities, I know it showed up in our community, about physical injuries versus psychological injuries. What means more? What do we give more attention to? So I feel like that whole process feeds into that feeling of isolation and feeling like your experience, it feeds into the tension. It feeds into people saying, well, you're really lucky. I was at a conference once where one of the gentlemen lifted up the tablecloth and said, oh, you're from Boston? Well, it looks like you didn't lose a leg, so I guess you're doing okay there. I mean, that really happened. And I was just like mortified, shocked. I mean, you're embarrassed. There's so much that comes along with that kind of behavior and situation. So for me, tension really describes part of that experience. And then I love this photo. I don't know, it's just so beautiful. It's of our brain. And for me, it's really helpful to think about traumatic stress. And it happens to our brain. It's not really a choice. It happens to your brain, it happens to your body. I can't not make it happen. I jump at really loud noises. I probably will jump at really loud noises for the rest of my life. If something happens behind me and I don't see it, I'm going to have a reaction. That is my brain. That is my traumatic experience living inside my brain. And when something happens that feels familiar to my traumatic situation, I have a reaction. Um, Part of what has been helpful for me is accepting that that is going to happen. And I can't, at some point, I had to stop feeling like it's not fair that it happens or it shouldn't happen. That is not helpful language. It's going to happen. My brain remembers it. I can't erase it. It's an imprint and it's trying to warn me and save me. I just have to remember that I don't need to be saved right now. I needed to be saved back then. And then just sort of acknowledge that it happened, that I don't like the way it feels, and I'm okay. But that is where my power lies in my recovery journey, is not trying to not make it happen or be really upset that it's happening, but to say, okay, this happens, and sort of meet it with that diffusion of the emotion from the experience. But I think it's also really helpful to remind people in our lives that we can't help it. It imprints, it's part of us. So it's learning what to do about it, not just to ignore it or not to pretend it didn't happen. And I love these 2 points, and I've used this in trainings that I've done because they really spoke um, to me. And, traumatic events is not just the event itself that determines whether or not it's traumatic, but our personal experience of the event. Because I think that's another thing that we go through, or something that people, when we again look at the topic for tonight, facing the doubters. If somebody else says, okay, well, I don't think that would impact me that way, well, that's good for you. And that's not how it impacted me. But it is helpful to know that it is a deeply personal experience and it's your experience that matters. And if other people say that, there could be all kinds of reasons why they're saying that. They might be too uncomfortable thinking about what it was like for you. Excuse me. So, and two people can be exposed to the same event or series of events and experience and interpret them completely differently. And again, that doesn't mean that one person's experience is more or less important, or they're more well than you are. It just means that we're different and that we experience that event differently. That's a big lesson, I think. And again, when we get activated by somebody doubting or somebody saying the wrong thing or somebody not understanding, to be able to say, well, every person experiences things differently in their own way. And our family and our friends and people in our lives really need to know this, um, because they may not. When it comes down to traumatic stress and the actual, PTSD, and what is it that, we're diagnosed with, if we are diagnosed with something, that's a very specific process that, we take seriously. I can tell you, for me, it was really hard for me to accept when I heard the psychologist I was meeting with say, you have PTSD. I was like, you take that back. You take that back right now. Because I don't know that I would have called it that. I don't know if it was because of my own stigma around what it meant to have PTSD. I don't know if it's because in my mind that diagnosis was reserved for the most serious sort of symptoms, but it really is about, the cluster of symptoms that you experience and how they show up in your life. One of the things that I wanted to point out is difficulty remembering things, and what's not listed here, but is also part of the way we describe symptoms for PTSD, is negative cognitions about yourself. So that shame and those feelings we have about ourselves for being in this situation, that needs to be taken into account too. Lots of people I know have, and actually the research tells us that somebody might be subclinical with PTSD symptoms, but that doesn't mean that you're not suffering the same as somebody who has PTSD. So I think that it's important just to, if this is something that you feel you're struggling with, to get professional support with, that it's something that was really important to me, just to understand like how it shows up and how we live with it and then what we do about it. because we don't want to be stuck there either. And not that we want to be stuck there, but we don't, it's hard to figure out how do we evolve these identities, that sort of the victim or the person impacted identity. Um, for example, those arousal symptoms with the loud noise, I can't, if I'm irritable or angry when it happens, which it can be really frustrating, but I don't want to be irritable and angry forever. And not that it's a matter of just being like, okay, I don't want to be that way anymore, so now it's going to stop, but there are ways to learn to sort of strategize and evolve the way that we react and the way that we think and feel about how we react. And, trauma shows up in these funny ways. And I love this little um, way of thinking about it showing up in our memory, emotion, and cognition, the way we think, the way we feel. And I did some writing right after the event and I wrote down things that I don't remember. And now, if I try to call certain things to memory, I can't remember them. But I wrote them down the day after thinking, I don't want to not remember this. And now I don't remember it. And if I try to picture it in my mind, I can't. So I think that that's really interesting too. And I also think when people doubt our experiences and doubt what's happening to us, we already doubt ourselves and our own memory and our own emotions and our own thoughts. And it just makes it more complicated because we doubt ourselves. Now they're doubting us. And it creates this sort of internal tension struggle that complicates our recovery. This is probably for me the most important part, or one of the most important elements to think about when exploring what your recovery process is like. Personal histories matter. We experience, two people can experience the exact same event and experience them differently because of our personal histories, because of past traumas, because of past stressors, because of past challenges that we've had to endure in life. And I wrote here, my personal history was complicated. We don't need to go into deep into that today, but you know, I would say that so much of what happened with me on the trauma side, I believe also is because of my personal history. And research does also tell us that. So and for me, that was hard, right? If I thought about, okay, I feel this way because this event happened, but I also know that I may feel this way about this event because this event happened, it doesn't make that event less of an impact. It just makes them, you know, playing off each other or exacerbating each other. But I know what that's like to wonder, am I less of a victim of this because I feel like my reaction is aggravated because of this? No, because this still happened and I still experience that. But it's hard. And again, like when we go to our doubters and we think about finding our own words and trying to figure this out anyway, I think for me, what we take away is that your personal history does matter a lot, and to really try to understand how and how it influences your experience. And the process is really, I think, about learning. There is so much to learn and so much to learn to live with. And again, that goes back to the kind of the imprint of traumatic experiences, is that we're not going to unlearn it. It's not going to go away. And we do have to learn to live with things. Sometimes it's a question, why? Why did this happen to me? Why did I survive? Why did this loved one not survive? And some questions will not ever have an answer. And again, if we part of that journey might be to how do I learn to live with a question with no answer? Recently, I was doing research for a class I'm teaching, a grief, loss, and bereavement class. And I love this one researcher so much. I've been listening to all her podcasts wherever I can find them. But she said, sometimes the answer is we're living with something that was meaningless. It was a meaningless event that caused great harm. And that's the answer, that it was meaningless, that it was this senseless, meaningless event. There's no answer to, like, why would this happen to me? So I just thought that was, for me, it was an impactful way to hear that that can actually be the answer too. So I think the process and what we can tell people is I'm learning. And figuring things out as I go. For me, that involved therapy. I love this visual of, like, it was a big mess in your mind, and by sort of talking it through. I also think peer support. I think having opportunities to be with other survivors is really helpful. Being able to have a mentor is super helpful, but anything that you can do to learn about trauma, that trauma is the event and it's something that took place in the past. And what we want to try and do is figure out how these consequences keep showing up in our life. And they can be really subtle, they can be really dramatic. And it doesn't matter if they're subtle or dramatic, it just matters how it impacts you. And again, I think too, as we sort of learn to understand our experiences, find the words, find ways around sort of some of the emotions that are really difficult, we can also find our voice more, both in how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to other people. And maybe even make the choice to not have to talk to other people. And I love this quote by Bessel van der Kolk. He says, trauma results in a fundamental organization of the way the mind, brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but our very capacity to think. And I think, and I think that's true. I think I experienced that. So being able to sort of understand and, that helps build that self-compassion, that this is something that, again, back to my little brain photo that I love, this is something that happened to us. And we can't just say, okay, that happened. And now I'm going back and everything's normal. We have to sort of untangle that. And I love this visual so much. I wish the little blue men were kind of a different different figures, but I love the idea of this is what the journey of the PTSD healing really is about. It's about how do we set it free? It's this experience that's overwhelming. It could be overwhelming with sensation. It can be overwhelming with thoughts, memories, emotions. We can be revisited by haunting things, and it's really heavy. So, figuring out how do we make it less heavy? And then eventually, the little butterfly is how do we transform it? And that's really the goal, is what do I do with this? Right? If we go back to the beginning when we say, okay, I had one life up until that moment, and now everything's different. Part of that setting free is, there's a lot of grief involved, there's a lot of loss involved. You're a new version of yourself. You don't know this version of yourself yet, how we react in certain situations. Sometimes it's, we get really upset with ourselves in certain situations. I know I got pretty quiet. I avoided being around people. I didn't want to be around people, and that keeps it stuck inside me. So that getting out and reintegrating and just figuring out how to move forward really is part of the setting free process. And this is such, again, like one of these little intuitive suggestions, but for me, it was a total game changer. And a friend said it to me sort of off the cuff one day, and she said, "You have no compassion for yourself." And I was like, hmm. And again, let's go back to personal histories matter. I had no compassion for myself. So, self-compassion really, for me, was the start of a change around how to carry your experience differently. and how to not be so hard on yourself and not be, I don't know, just so distressed by all the, lonely emotions that are sort of swirling around in your own mind, but starting to really think about, would I think about other people in this way? Would when this person tells me what they went through, do I go, oh, well, they should be this, this, and this, or they shouldn't feel that those things? No, I would never say that to somebody else. But, when we have those doubts in our own mind, then somebody else doesn't quite understand why we're still suffering or struggling, then it's easy to turn on yourself in the face of that. And the goal is, life before, life after. The goal is really that a dramatic change is coming. And that could take 2 years or 10 years. I think, to be on the journey of the transformation. I would say for me, I was thinking about this the other day. I would say that by 5 years, I thought I was in a pretty decent place with all the changes and transitions in life. But at 10 years, I look back at 5 years and I'm like, ooh, I wasn't really as good as I thought I was. And now at 12 years, I look back at 10 years and I'm like, okay, I'm in a much better, and it's not that you were in a good place, but the more you develop, the more you can look back and see that this is just something that's going to be going on for a long time. And that's not bad. And that actually, I think, is part of how you get your power back is by being like, okay, I'm on a journey. And it sounds cliche, we say it all the time, survivor journey, but we're on a journey. And the journey, I think it's helpful to hold out in your mind that it's transformative. You're not going back. You are going to hopefully have a fresh perspective on your identity and on the experiences that shape our existence and sort of how we move in the world, and that it really is about growing and changing. Um, that sounds really great. Like we're going to grow and change and evolve. And while you're doing that, we're losing friends, we're losing relationships, we're losing familiar ways of problem solving, we're losing, a way that we used to see the world. So I think it's helpful to hold that two things are true at one time. We are changing and losing, and we're also gaining and getting. It's easier, I think, to find the things that help you transform when we're looking for them, when we're sort of in that, keeping in your mind that meaning making is a part of the process and that we're looking for it. And I love this. I always say it wrong. How do you say it? It's like, kintsugi, did I say it right? I love the idea that I guess the BE for beautiful. I never finished typing beautiful, but the cracks can make us beautiful. It depends on what we fill them in with, right? So if we think about these kinds of traumatic situations. One time, the psychologist I worked with called it an annihilation, and I was like, yes to that word. And that just meant so much. And when I think about that, I think about that sort of blasting apart, right? And then, okay, now I'm going to put myself back together. I'm going to learn all this new stuff. I'm going to understand stuff about me. I'm not I'm different, but equally as beautiful. It's just a new sort of way of seeing the things that, really change us and challenge us. So in the end, I mean, I think when we talk about, healing and empowerment, and it's really about finding words and finding the language to help describe and understand exactly what it is that you've gone through. I do, for me, naming it and calling it what it was very helpful. Even though I thought that was kind of hard to hear and it took me a while to sort of understand that. I can look back now and say it was important to call it PTSD. It was probably complex PTSD in some ways when I look at, my personal history and what contributed to making it a stressful process. And like I said, I think it's just important to be on the journey, knowing that it's not your fault that the world changed. World you used to know is no longer. And we can be sad and be grieving that while we're rebuilding and growing and developing. And for people that don't understand, I think a helpful strategy is to come up with two or three things that you get really comfortable saying to them. And it could be something like, you clearly don't understand. It could be something like, you should be really grateful that you don't have to understand. Whatever it is. But if think about it ahead of time, it can be helpful because sometimes in the middle of feeling that distress that sort of gets kicked off really quickly, it's hard to access our executive mind and come up with a really good comeback. So sometimes planning ahead is really helpful when it comes to how to push back people that are doubters. So I'm going to pause there because I could probably just keep on rambling. And I don't know if there's any thoughts or questions or if anybody relates to anything that I shared.
Well, for me personally, I've come up with I know you don't understand, and I'm glad you don't.
Hmm.
And I have to remind myself that my expectations of what someone might say to me, that's my expectation. That's not what is in their mind. So I have to try to erase that because I mean, I know that there's one person on this call, we kind of joke about how, she could write a book about the stupid things that people say.
Hmm.
And it's so true. I mean, and I think for the most part, people are trying to be helpful, but they just don't know what to say. They're uncomfortable with both what we've been through and our change. Change makes people uncomfortable. And a lot of people don't know what to say. So it's hard for them to it's hard to talk to them.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I know I mentioned one of my current deep dive is around grief and loss and trauma and sort of how they're really closely related, even though they're uniquely different experiences. But I feel like there's so much loss in the trauma that survivors or people impacted by mass violence face. And it could be as simple as like friendships changing and, losing friendships, losing marriages, losing sometimes it's just hard, right? When you're different, you can't just, people want you to be the way that they're used to you being. So it's really hard for people when we're not.
And that's a really good point. I mean, I know so many people impacted who have lost friendships, who've lost relationships, whether it's, marriages or significant others, um, because they don't get it.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges is how to how to live and integrate this part of our identity, but not let it run our identity. And that is hard. I know there's been times when I felt like, okay, well, if I don't go to that year marker anniversary thing, then I'm out of that group. And, that's hard. Does that mean that everything that I just went through doesn't matter anymore? Does it mean that it is complicating because again, like I think if we go back to life before, we're different. We don't know who we are yet. I feel like this victim survivor identity becomes a big part of what kind of runs things for a while. And then when we transition into, more like understanding yourself and your experience afterwards, it's hard because it's like it's a big part of, how we see ourselves. So it's, again, like really intuitive, and I don't know why it felt like rocket science, but thinking about it, but like we can always be two things at one time, and it doesn't have to be an either or. So thinking about that too.
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up the growth, change, and evolving. And I just want to make sure people understand that that takes time and a lot of work too.
Hmm. Oh
You know,
yeah.
that's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen by a certain date. Like you said, we're all on our different journey. So, um, you know, what might happen for one person at 8 years might not happen for another person till 12 years. So just kind of a reminder that there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. And just, being on the journey doesn't mean that we're not still like developing. I mean, it is painful. And even in a painful period of life, we want to look for opportunities to try to experience joyfulness when we can, because that's really important. But yeah, it's complicated. It's probably one of the most complicated. I think victimization, um, especially the context of these kinds of attacks, I think it's incredibly complicated to understand, to explain. I think part of the validation is coming around with other people in groups like this and being like, yep, I feel that, I get that, that makes sense to me. So I think that that's really helpful to just, keep connecting with other people too and borrow words from each other.
I agree. I mean, definitely one of the things that's gotten me as far as it has, because none of my friends, none of my family understood. And I'm so grateful that they don't, but I wish they did to a certain degree.
Hmm.
But being able to pick up the phone and call somebody else who does understand, who can validate that, hey, I'm not, what I'm feeling is normal, is so incredibly important. And nobody can do that like somebody else who's been through it.
Truth.
Amy, the feedback in the chat is people are saying that they're really relating to the things that you said, and I so appreciate that you spoke from your experience. And I can see where a lot of people, well, most people would struggle to put words to what they experience because we're used to the words that we already know to describe the experiences that we've already had, and to experience something so horrendous is it's like it puts the word like gut wrenching to a whole
Hmm.
different level.
Hmm.
And suddenly words that we've used before take on different meaning.
Hmm.
And so I could really see where, finding the words to describe what you're feeling is so important. And I love the suggestion about coming up with something to say to someone who has a doubt or a rude response to you ahead of time, especially with the holidays coming up, could be very, very helpful because, like you said, sometimes, I mean, I've heard people say rude things to survivors and it can stop a survivor in their tracks. And because it's kind of like they want to say, WTF,
Hmm.
why did you say that to me? But it's not necessarily like the appropriate place to say that. Like the guy lifting up the tablecloth.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'd been there, I probably would have come unglued because on your behalf, even though
Hmm.
it wasn't my place to do that. That just is so frustrating to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It about the words have a whole new level. I mean, one of the things I do when I've done training for clinicians is I actually used this one picture from Route that was um, I saw on the news a lot. And when I see the faces in the people in the photo, I actually have goosebumps on my arms right now thinking
Mhm.
about it. So when you really look at what's happening in the picture, people are running and I use that picture and I put it up and I say to the people, the clinicians, like, your job is to try to learn how to work with everything that's trapped in that person's mind and body and heart that you can see in the
Mhm.
residue of the photo and in people's faces. It's sensory, it's emotional. And I can tell you, as somebody who worked in the field before and after, and I had done a lot of work in the field in hard environments and stuff, I thought I knew a lot. I was like, ooh, I really didn't know enough. And
Mm,
it's not, it's not my fault. I mean, you can only know what you know and what you learn from the people you work with, and then you live something and you're like, those words mean something different. And
yeah,
I do think that if when it's possible, if when people say the wrong thing, if we can regulate ourselves to try to get back to the executive mind to be able to have a response that's, again, like these are helpful if you plan them ahead of time. It helps us not feel destabilized and sort of
right.
in charge of what's happening to me and not re-victimized by you. But it also helps us like validate and name what's happening to yourself. Like, ooh, these are the situations that don't go well. hmm
Mhm.
And I'm gonna now say to you, like, you're using that word so cavalierly, and you have no idea what that means to say that. And it's,
Wow.
yeah, it's people don't, we don't really want them to know, and they don't know. And yeah, that's such a complicated, but the words mean more than what people think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Thank you so
especially
much
with
for
the
sharing.
dismissive
Ooh,
words.
ouch.
Yeah.
I've had people when they find out that I was at route, they're like, "Oh, that must have been awful." And I'm like, "Awful doesn't even begin to describe it." But I mean, how can you describe it to somebody who wasn't there? There's no words that can explain everything that you've been through in a situation like that.
And you can it's so interesting too. I know you mentioned, some of the work some of the groups I've been fortunate to be involved with are survivor groups, survivors of terrorism groups, and one of the groups is global, a working group, and it's so fascinating and also reaffirming and reassuring all over the world. People say the same thing all over the world. I mean, and even in the most dire, complex humanitarian crisis, on top of a terror attack in the middle of a, war zone or conflict zone in Africa or other countries, people will say, I want my voice to be heard. And when you look at, what it means to be terrorized by something, it literally means to have no voice. So, I mean, when we talk about the experience of that, it really is about finding words and language and your voice to be able to say to people, you're wrong. Be glad you don't know. And don't make me have to fight you. No, I'm just kidding about the fight you part. But
Kind of.
don't make me have to bring out my, I'm just kidding. But
Well, and I think too, you brought up that two people at the same incident can have very different experiences because of what's happened in the past. And I think that's so important to remember. I know for me, I sat next to a couple the whole time and they happened to be from San Diego, so we got together afterwards. And the wife never thought we were in danger. And the rest of us were like, how can you even think that? But it was because of her past experience.
mhm,
So to me, I'm like, she's out of her mind, but that was her reality.
mhm,
And, she wasn't diagnosed with PTSD because she didn't think we were in danger. And that doesn't mean that something's wrong with me because I was diagnosed with PTSD.
mhm,
So everybody can have different feelings, different thoughts, everything. And Amy, like you know, my history before route was there were a lot of ups and downs. You know, so that's probably part of why that happened.
Mhm. Very true.
Does anybody have any questions, any thoughts? Tara?
I had a friend hit me up recently, and she must be going through her own traumatic events right now. But she was like in tears. What is this car doing? She was in tears, and she was like, "Girl, I can't believe everything that you went through. Like she's just now realizing it 8 years later, you know." And she's like crying, and she's like, "I should have been a better friend. I should have been there for you more." And I'm like, girl, we're all going through our own stuff, you know? And I'm trying to make her feel better. Um, but yeah, she's just now realizing like all of it. You know what I mean? And it gosh, and it's 8 years later. And I should have been there for you more. And I can't believe, I've just watched this and that or whatever. I don't know if she just revisited it or whatever, but it made me feel it made me feel good that she was thinking of me, but it made me feel bad that she felt bad about it, you know? But any support, I told her any support is good support, you know, as long as you're not saying, "Oh, get over it already." I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard that, and it's just like, wow. But seeking therapy, is that a cat? Seeking therapy is the best thing I've ever done. And I was telling her, like, I think you need to go. Like, it's been 8 years. Like, I think it would be a good idea for you, you know? And she's like, no, I'm seriously considering it. I'm like, good, better late than never. But yeah, for her to think of me in that way, I was just like, oh, poor thing. Like, I feel like I'm better, and doing good now. And I said, a year or two ago, I would have never thought that. You know what I mean? And Jill, I was on the floor. Like it was hard, to get back up. And she,
I think she froze. But, you know, to her point, I think too that if somebody goes through their own traumatic incident, um, whether it's mass violence or something else, they start to realize how impactful it can be. You know, I know for me, prior to route, I thought I understood PTSD. I had lots of friends in the military. I grew up, I was a military brat. I thought I understood it, and I know for a fact now that I had no clue what it was until I was faced with it myself.
Mhm.
Amy, I appreciate everything that you've said, and I think you gave us all a lot to think about. And even the part about your journaling, about in the beginning that you wrote some things down that later on you went back and it was like, who wrote this kind of thing? Um, because it wasn't part of your active memory. I mean, that's really good for people to hear, and the fact that you even questioned what you went through. Um, it's just really good for people to hear. And I so appreciate your sharing with us today.
So we wanted to remind everybody that we have the Continuing the Conversation with Heart support groups. They are via Zoom the third Tuesday of each month at 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern. And they are generally the fourth Thursday of each month at 6 o'clock Pacific and 9 o'clock Eastern. However, for November and December, those dates happen to fall on Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we're going to do it the Monday before, the fourth Monday of each month, instead of the fourth Thursday. And that's facilitated by Jackie and myself. This is for anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. So even if it's friends and family who don't understand PTSD, it would definitely be appropriate for them to come on and learn, because it is hard to talk to people who don't get it. We want to remind people real quick about all the integrative services programs offered through the Resiliency and Justice Center. The peer support program, where you can be paired one-on-one with a trained peer who has been impacted by mass violence. First Tuesdays with Heart, and then the Continuing the Conversation support groups. There's also a monthly mindfulness and meditation, which is via Zoom. I'm sorry, that's a weekly. Trauma recovery yoga is monthly, and we have meditative art programs that are twice a month. The only thing that is in person is the equine therapy demonstration. So if you happen to be in Vegas visiting or live there, feel free if they are doing a demonstration when you're there to go ahead and sign up and attend. It's amazing what they can do with that. And all this stuff is listed on the Resiliency and Justice Center's website under calendar. We like to show real quickly what the calendar looks like. Anything that is not event specific is open to anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. Additional support, if you'd like to be paired with a heart mentor, you can go on the Resiliency Center's website under heart. The disaster distress helpline was created for people impacted both by man-made and natural disasters. They have counselors there 24/7, and this is more than I hate to say just somebody who is in crisis mode. Even something like, you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you have thoughts about what's going on from your incident with life. There are people there who are trained to talk through that with you. Because most of our friends are usually asleep at that time. So it's nice to have that option. The National Mass Violence Center has a lot of great resources. They do have a virtual resiliency center as well with lots of great resources. As I mentioned early on, the Transcend app that Amy helped with is great. That was actually created for people impacted by mass violence specifically. So I would highly recommend if you haven't already, download that. Make sure when you type it into your store, the Play Store, do Transcend NMVC for National Mass Violence Center because there are some other Transcend apps. Um, as always, 988 is a good one to have in your phone just in case, if you're talking to somebody, that could definitely make a difference. If you're not part of our First Tuesdays with Heart Facebook page, we do have that. We post the link to the videos. We have some survivors who post a lot of uplifting posts to kind of help us through the day because life can be hard. And if you enjoy cooking, we also have a Cooking for Post-Traumatic Growth page where we share recipes and things like that. And that's just for people impacted by mass violence. So next month, we have Molly Maurer joining us. She is a survivor of both Route 91 and Borderline. She's on peer support herself, and she's going to be talking about navigating the holidays and values. So we'd encourage you to join us for that. And she will also in January, just so you know, she will be leading a vision board class that we're going to have. So we'll post information on that next month. So we just want to thank everyone for joining us. If you have any questions or comments or topic suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. Um, we've got several months ahead booked, but we always love to have new ideas because, what I think of maybe not be something that somebody else thinks of. So we definitely want your input. So thank you everyone so much. And thank you, Amy. We
Thank
really
you,
appreciate you
everyone.
joining us and always good to see you.
It's good to see everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Amy. You're the best.
Yes, you are.